Welcome, everybody. Today, we have an amazing guest. Major League Mental Skills coach Brent Walker is going to be joining myself and my business partner, Ron Iosa, for a sit-down to talk about some mental skills and attributes that we can apply to the business world and how sports and business often parallel. So, Brent, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited to get in. I know time's a little limited today, so we're going to jump right in. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute, just tell us a little bit about your journey to probably one of the world's most exciting positions in the middle of one of the world's most exciting sports. How did you end up there, and what's your favorite part of it?
So I started my career in I'll just give you a brief background on kind of the field. Was in the field of sports psychology. When I started, quite honestly, not many people were doing it full time. So I, like many people before me, took a job as a professor. I was a professor for about a decade. I was consulting on the side. And after a decade, there was an opportunity at Columbia University to do mental training for the athletic department in a full-time capacity. So in 2012, I took that role at Columbia. I was in charge of mental training. I oversaw our leadership program, our sports dietitian as well. I did that from 2012 to 2021. And then in 2021, I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to join the Dodgers. So, and that was coming out of COVID, if you remember that time. So,
That was an interesting time.
Yeah,
Talk about mental skills coaching, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I'll never forget that either. Our women's basketball team had just made the conference tournament, getting ready to go to the conference tournament. The conference tournament was new in the Ivy League. And then they shut it down, and it was one of those head-scratching moments of, what are we doing? And then literally within 3 days, everything had been shut down. And in 21, we still hadn't even I don't think we had come back and started sports, or we were just getting back into sports at Columbia when the opportunity came for the Dodgers. And before I don't want to sing my own accolades, our travel coordinator always reminds me, we won the division 9 times before I got there, and then I got there in 21, and we didn't win the division.
Oh, man.
But having said that, we won 106 games. The Giants just won 107. So
there you go.
I was humbled quickly, though. They won the World Series a year before I got there, and then I get there, and we're the wild card. So
wild. So, and what would you say that the most excitable part of your role is? Is it the interaction with the players? Is it in those potentially combustible situations that you can make a change with them? Where do you find the most energy coming into you?
I think for me, the kind of the bigger picture piece that excites me the most is it's just helping literally the best of the best achieve their potential and achieve their greatness. Mm-hmm. So, and quite honestly, a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm in the dugout, so I get to see what they're doing firsthand. I'm there every single day. So I get to see a pretty good picture of what's happening. A lot of times my role is just giving them observations of what I'm seeing them do, pointing out some of the things maybe they've done previously that they're not doing now. But to me, it's just it's that puzzle of elite performance. How do you become the best at what you do? What keys are there? What tweaks do we need to make to do that? That's something that excites me about the role. And just on a daily basis to witness people who are just so good at what they do is very exciting.
So question on that, making some tweaks, you see what they're doing, what they were doing, and what they're not doing. Mm-hmm. From what perspective, right? So you're, as a psychologist in this position for the mental skills, are you only examining what's going on the field, or are you spending some significant time with them off the field, out of the clubhouse?
That's a great question. So sometimes I'll even meet with guys in our hotel rooms. So now I don't go out with the guys, do those types of things, but like our schedule is very, very regimented. So I'm seeing what they're doing, but our conversations go well beyond like what's happening with your family. Like last year, we must have set some kind of record for births. I mean, we had so many guys go on paternity leave, having their first, second, third children. So when you have like people don't understand the grind of a 162 game major league season, especially when you're fortunate enough to have a good team. You're playing on Sunday Night Baseball, like as an example. We're going to play the Yankees on Sunday Night Baseball when we play the Yankees in June. We have an off day the day after that. So, but if we didn't, and like think back, I think 2 years ago we played the Mets on Sunday Night Baseball. We fly back to LA. We get back at 4:35 in the morning, and we play that day. Oof. We play that night actually. So, and that's you may go through a stint. I think last year we had 3 straight trips where we arrived between 2 and 5 a.m. So that you're just like, and that takes a toll on you, like your family. You're like, a lot of times I'm sitting there going, man, I can't imagine playing a baseball game today. I don't know how these guys do it. So it's being able to adapt to some of those things, what's going on with your family, with your outside life. All those things are going to factor in. Now with social media is one of the biggest things too. I mean, you'd be surprised at the number of death threats and everything else that guys get over the most ridiculous things.
Wow.
And with the whole betting too, now everyone thinks because they placed a bet on someone,
I
they
bet,
have the right
yeah,
to
'cause there's a lot more at stake.
Yeah,
that's open.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's interesting. If we take that one step further and we can apply that to the business world right now in a small way, the landscape's changing so quickly, right? Whether that be economics or in certain industries, you planned on the game being played a certain way, and now in whether you're looking at it in a year or a 2-year span, you're in the middle of the game, and all of a sudden things are changing, and you might find yourself behind the ball or just needing to play a different game. Do you have any advice for people in that role based on your experience to say, okay, maybe you're behind, right? Maybe you got to do something entirely different than what you planned on. But when that landscape changes, how do you stay steady? How do you stay consistent? And most importantly, how do you stay focused on what the original goal, was?
Yeah, I think to me, one of the biggest pieces of that is, and I think you'd be surprised, and you might be surprised by me saying this, but like for myself, for my colleagues who work in professional sport, my closest colleagues, none of us actually do goal setting. And part of the reason being is that, to your point, things are going to change. But I think there's a lot out there that tells us too, if you're focused on the outcome's not within your control. And if you stay focused on the outcome, a lot of times it's going to keep you from really focusing on or doing what you need to do to be successful. So I think someone who's going through that, who's not getting the performance they need, number one, take your focus off the results. But number two, perspective is so key there. Like if you're in the first quarter of your sales or your business, whatever it may be, how does that compare to quarter one last year? How does that go? Is this a me thing right now? Is it a quarter thing? Is it a bigger trend than that? Sometimes you just got to step back and analyze the bigger picture. What is really the source of the results I'm getting right now? So I think that's probably the biggest piece for me. And I'll give you maybe a small example of this. One of the coolest things I experienced with the Dodgers in 21, year one. Like I said, we won 106 games. We ended up being the wild card, so we have to play in the wild card game against the Cardinals. And going into the game, Chris Taylor's 9 for 72, really struggling at the plate. And Chris, I think, was probably overcomplicating things. He's trying to fix too many things, do too many things. And then I think he just made a conscious effort to simplify. So we go into that game. He hits a walk-off home run to win the game. And they interview him at home plate. And this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. 55,000 people were just standing there. He's being interviewed at home plate. It's on TV. And they ask him, what allowed you to do it in that moment? And he said, to be honest, I just thought small. His quote was, think small and big things will happen. Wow. And when we're struggling, we tend to catastrophize and we think about all the potential things that are going to go wrong, that have already gone wrong. And quite honestly, and this is a key to any performance in any field, is that you have to be present and just narrow it down to what can I do here right now in this moment that's going to make me successful. And the cool part of that story with Chris is they end the interview and he just turns and puts his hands up in the air and 55,000 people erupt. It was so incredible.
That's awesome.
It was amazing. But to that point, and I think another piece of that puzzle too is really taking time to take one step back. Like the first time I talk to anybody, I ask them, when you're at your best, what's it like? What do you do? What do you focus on? What's your process? How do you feel? Everything about that. Compare that to when you're struggling. How's it different? And I think a lot of times when we're not getting results, we change a lot of things. We may not be aware of it, but we tend to change things. And so at the core of knowing what it is that makes you your best, if you know that, now you know what to go to when you're not getting results. And that also helps with that perspective piece of, wait a minute, I'm doing what I need to do to be successful. If I'm not getting results, maybe it is something else that I need to adapt to or identify as part of that.
I'm always fascinated at the parallels with sports and business and how applicable they are together. This brings us, Ron and I, one of the businesses, that we operate is a real estate sales team. And there was a point, and this is before COVID. The COVID market changed things a bit, made things overinflated for a while. But there was a point where we couldn't break a certain level of production, right? It was like 88 million, 90 million, and we would add a bunch of people to the team. We had an office full of staff. We did like all of these things to increase that production. And one year we said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to simplify it, right? And we're going to go backwards. And we rewound. And the team got a lot smaller. The staff went from 5 to 1. And that first year was the first year that we actually hit the goal that we had always set. And we blew through 100 million simply by simplifying. I mean, we had every piece of tech back then. It was like, new CRM or tech came out. We're like, we'll add this. And like you said, we would be changing, 3-5 things at a time and not really being able to even analyze what we're changing and what's impactful and what's not. So very interesting how you say what he said in that moment was, simplify things. A smaller focus creates a larger result.
Well, something that you said sparked a memory for me too, and that is you had a specific number you're trying to hit. Like in my world, baseball, no one hits 400. The last time it was done was Ted Williams in like 41. But if you look at that, the last person that truly came close was George Brett. And when asked why he didn't do it, he said, I made the classic mistake. The last week of the season, I tried to hit 400. And you go back to even the 4-minute mile and Roger Bannister, everyone believed it was impossible to physiologically, that was the myth, was it was physiologically impossible to run a sub 4-minute mile. Roger Bannister runs a 3:59.4. The next time two people break the 4-minute barrier because it's no longer a barrier. Right. And I think that's where a lot of times we get so focused on a number and trying to meet those numbers that becomes the ceiling rather than the floor. And then when you take that out of the equation and just go back to simplifying and doing a process really well, that's when you bust through it.
That's the key word right there, the process, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about before, you said the problem is people focus on the results too often, whether it's business or athletics. Yeah. Fall in love with the process, right? Don't just do the process and go through the motion, but literally fall in love with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Results will follow. You also said something about when you have a conversation with somebody, you'll ask them, you'll say, I believe what you said was, you ask them, how do you feel? And what is it that you're doing when you're succeeding? So my question there is, same thing, whether we're talking to an entrepreneur, whether we're talking to an athlete, is it fair to say that it's not universal, that some things work for some people and for others it's different, or no?
Oh, 100%. You have to find what works for you. And that's always a challenge. Like I think if I was going to tell someone how to succeed, the first thing I would do is find a partner, someone that you can bounce ideas off, find a mentor, find somebody that you can work with. But having said that, I think the thing we always try to do is be like somebody else, and you got to be yourself. I can tell you, like the guys I work with who are uber elite at what they do, their personalities are completely different. And how they go about it, there are some similarities, but for the most part, they have their own way of doing it, and it's what works for them. Right. And that's what you really have to identify is what is your path, what is your process that makes you great, and it is different for everyone, for sure.
Right. Yeah. Stay hungry, stay humble.
Yeah, it's a interesting concept because again, when we apply it, a lot of people who work with coaches in the business sector, and sometimes they'll get into a mentor relationship. By default, they'll try to mimic every bit of what's told or follow every piece of a model. And we're told to follow models, which are important, but then we're also told that at its deepest level, to then make sure once we get the model and the process down to be able to adapt them for us, right? Our own individuality. So I think that's important, because for a lot of people, when you try to maybe be too much like someone else's path, you find yourself putting yourself in spots where you might not be performing at your best, because that's someone else's power area where yours is here, and actually falling short of what could be. So that's wild. Let's follow that to the next step and say, okay, say someone did operate at an elite level, right? They had their banner year in business, they had their banner year in sports, and then the next season shows up, or the next year shows up. Ron just used a couple words there, stay hungry. How do you work with these folks? Like, what tips do you have to keep somebody hungry? Again, whether that's in business and sports, who maybe accomplished some of those goals, or maybe even worse, got to a level that they didn't ever think they would get to, that doesn't match maybe their identity. How do we stay in that lane and continue forward without either regressing or kind of losing the wind behind their sails?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if you look at people who are really, really high achievers, they're always, the term I use is forward facing. So and this is the identity piece, I think, a little bit. You get to a place haven't been, and probably the best example I think of is when I used to work with golfers. So many times golfers, when the first time they have a chance to shoot like a 65 or a 63, that round ends up being a 68 or a 69, because they get to hole 15, and rather than pressing forward, they try to hold on to the round, and because they're not comfortable being there. And when you talk to, we all have comfort zones of where we are in terms of what our past performance is. The strongest predictor of belief is past performance. So if you really go off of that, you're in uncharted territory, you're uncomfortable because you don't really know if you can do it because you've never done it before. So, but in terms of that, the people that are so good at what they do, as soon as they hit one benchmark, they are forward facing going on to the other. Whereas people who struggle, a lot of times it's like, I made it here, I don't want to leave here. And so they spend all their time and energy looking backwards, of like hoping, wishing they don't go backwards versus in a golfer. I'll give you probably the best example. A guy started winning tournaments. And I said, you're winning going into the last round. What is your focus? I said, are you trying to strategically hold off the field? He said, no, my goal is to crush the field. So I'm constant forward facing. I don't want to beat him by a stroke. I want to beat him by 7 or 8 strokes. And that is the forward press that happens. And the great people that I witness, that is, as soon as they achieve one thing, it's on to the next one. They are putting it up. And that's where the reality is, I think 2 things. Number one, we assume, and we, like in sport, we train, but in business, we do the same thing. We assume success and time are just linear. They're just, you're going to go better and better and better. And I was in London at a leadership conference one time, and the head of, I think, creative development for Google was there, and he put up a slide. And the reality is performance does this. It goes all over the place. There's no linear path to anything you do. And understanding that, you just constantly press forward to get that next achievement, to do that next thing. We don't know what we're capable of until we do it. And so just constantly putting your focus and effort on what has worked, and then how do I continue with that, and then add to that to achieve the next thing that I'm capable of achieving.
It's wild.
So 2 comments on that. You're with athletes. So for you, maybe this is different, maybe it's not. I can't stand watching a football game. And I just told you before, I could watch sports all day and night. I can't stand watching a football game, and maybe you're up by 17 points and there's 8 minutes left in the game, and we're going to play it safe. Yeah. And I'm going to run a dive 3 in a row, and I'm just going to take the 3 and out. And I'm saying, why is your foot not on their throat? Because that's how you got up by 17, right? And I'm like, and I'm the idiot watching television. You're getting paid millions to call the plays. So that always just completely drives me insane with that. And I also heard a fantastic podcast this morning during my workout, and the gentleman was talking about trajectory. And the common, I guess, stopping point for so many people, how they sabotage their business. And maybe in sports, the same thing, because Bill's opening question was, what do you do if you win the World Series? What do you do the next year? So in business, that sabotage point is $1.2 million in income. That's like the general number for so many people, is they hit that and they say, that's pretty good. Right. And then they stop there. And so they don't go for the next piece.
Yeah.
So I wonder, like, what are your thoughts on that? And especially from the athletics or the athlete's perspective, where he or she says, like, I did it. I just won the World Series, right? I won the Super Bowl. I'm going to Disneyland, right? Whatever. Okay, what do I do when the season opens up? Or maybe, what do I do in 3 weeks when the vacation is over?
Well, and I think too, probably the biggest crossover between business and sports is money. So, and one thing you have to consider in sports is, what's a guy going to do when he gets his big contract? Is he still going to be motivated? Because I think really at the core of it, what we're talking about is motivation. Because after you hit a number, are you satisfied? Are you complacent because you're like, I'm comfortable. I'm not fighting for what I was fighting for in the past. There's that great quote where hard times create great men, and it goes on down the ladder, and then great men create easy times, and easy times create weak men. So that is it's a motivational issue. I think the way we look at it is through a motivational lens, then, to say, okay, number one, what is your purpose? At the core of it, why are you doing this? And when you can get in touch with your purpose and understand why you're doing it, now it's a different way of taking the number out of the equation. But if your purpose is deeper, or it is achievement oriented, now you can set your sights even higher related to that. But it really is a motivational issue. So how do we look at what drives you? And that's an important thing to know, is what drives me, because in the tough times, but in the easy times too, how is that going to impact the way you go about it? And I think that's the piece too of people who are truly great. They have oftentimes multiple drivers, but they're always activating a driver. Like, I work with guys who are set for generation. They have generational wealth that hasn't slowed them down a bit. I mean, they're still striving to achieve the next, because that is part of their DNA in terms of how they go about it and what they want to do. They want to achieve as much as they humanly possibly can. Yeah. And so, but they're in touch with their own motivation.
Do you see that sometimes as a conscious decision? Like, do they consciously say, all right, I gotta dig deep and figure out what's going to push me to the next level? Or do you feel like that's probably more natural just because of their behavioral style that got them to where they're at?
That's a good question. I think sometimes, I think, like, the best of the best, realistically, their higher power is at the end of the career, like the Hall of Fame. Like, the guys that are looking for the Hall of Fame, you never know when you're there. So you're constantly, you always have that next carrot to strive for. So some guys I talk to, that is in their part of what they do. Other guys, I think that is maybe it is there, but it's also like, what can motivate me right now? What can put a chip on my shoulder? And it could be like the whole Jordan meme of, I took that personally. I mean, a lot of greatness comes from people that, like the guys I'm around, they take things personally.
Oh yeah. A lot of coaches and managers look for that, right? To light the fire 100%. Under these guys.
Yeah. So it's just constantly looking for, and I mean, my wife's a successful CEO. She has that, she takes it personally. I always joke with her, the Jordan meme. I'm like, you are Jordan, you take everything personally. But that's what her driver is, so that it keeps her sharp, it keeps her moving forward. She has that in her.
In our business, we talk about what's your big why.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it, right? Like, why am I here, and why am I doing what I'm doing? You also said about, you reach this pinnacle and then what? And what is it? And I remember watching an interview with Tom Brady, and I think it was after his third Super Bowl, and he literally said, is this it? Is this it? Is this all I'm supposed to feel? Because I did it twice, and now I did it a third time, and I don't know if I'm supposed to feel something different, or if I'm supposed to do something else, or what. And I think maybe that at that moment in time, I can't help but wonder, okay, did he shift his why? Because to get to the next one and the next one and the next one, what was it? What drove him?
And that's, I think, Nick Saban talks a lot about success is temporary. It's a moment in time. And I think what we have to continue to do is literally that whole process of, all right, what's next? What do I go to next? We were even talking about last year. Obviously, the Dodgers have had a tremendous run of playoff success, and like I think there's been a lot of criticism. There's only one World Series there, but if you really look at it, like you win it, and then you're going to go to spring training. You're going to start over again next year. I mean, you're literally you meet your sales goals, and then you're on to the next thing. So it's constantly reinventing. Like, and sometimes, like you said, the motivation may change, but it's sitting down with that process. Is this still a driver for me? Do I need to change what my driver is?
Right.
Do I need to change has my why changed? Because like I think the financial piece of it too. Like after you reach a certain point, it may not have the same impact because things have changed in terms of your lifestyle and everything else. So
it can't just be that moment, right? Yeah. It can't just be I won the World Series for a couple of reasons. Matchbox 20 was a band. Rob Thomas was the lead singer, and their album was 14:59, meaning 14 minutes and 59 seconds. And his theory behind it was my 15 minutes of fame is almost up. Yeah, because it is so incredibly short-lived. Yeah. So then what? So if that's the pinnacle of everything, what do I have after that? And this is what we said earlier. This is why you fall in love with the process, because if the process is awesome and you love it, the World Series is great. The Super Bowl is great. The achievements in business are fantastic. I got to wake up tomorrow morning and I'm still a human being and I still have to go and do something, whatever that something might be, and I just need to keep driving forward. Not for nothing, I like I said earlier, I'm a sports nut. I love it. You know how many times the World Series is over and like 6 months goes by and you're like, who won the World Series last year? Come on.
I think it all comes full circle to answer. I think that question originally, you said these people operating at a really elite level are always looking forward. Right, when we did this years ago, we went on that Porsche driving experience. You remember that? We got to get in these high powered Porsches with professional drivers, and then we switched and they let us drive, right? And the rule was, wherever you look, that's where you're going to end up. So you got to look where you're going, because if you look at the wall, you're going to hit the wall. If you're going around that corner fast. So when you said that, it kind of drew that parallel, right? We can see how that shows up. And I think even if it's just an analogy that people could think of, like when you're driving, look where you're going. When people are spinning on ice and stuff, they say, right? If they're looking at something, that's where the car ends up going. It's just your natural direction there. So part of that is making sure that you have something to look at the next step. So I guess for people stuck in that, in that funk, that might be a great place to start, is what is the why, and what is the driver to give me something to look at in the windshield to go for, right? So that I can continue to move forward. And then I think somewhere in the mix, people are running into now, I know in the business sense, because the landscape has changed, because there's some extra stress factors in, and COVID created an interesting time where things were started to change quickly. And for many, it hasn't stopped yet, that evolution and that change. And that's created a setup for burnout. And so I believe, in your industry, you see that from time to time where guys are just burned out, whether it's mentally, physically. You talked about the travel regimen and a long season like that. Relationships, the impact on their personal relationships, I'm sure, spouses, things like that. When someone's in that burnout phase, whether that be business, whether it be sports, what advice would you give them to be able to either hit a reset for themselves physically, hit a reset for themselves mentally, and get back on track? Sometimes people don't have the ability to say, okay, I'm gonna take an off season here, right? So you have to find a way to work through it, but you also can't stay in that burnout phase for too long, or else it compounds, it gets worse. So what are your thoughts on burnout and how we can work around that?
I think one of the things we already hit on is one of the keys in going back and finding your purpose. Because I think if you look at, like, for instance, in the sport world, all the burnout literature, one of the key components of someone burnout is a change in performance in a negative way. So usually your burnout is tied to a drop in performance. Now, if we kind of dig into that, one of the other things that probably happens is you're not performing well. It's changing what you're focusing on. You're focused on the negative things that are happening. That's going to influence how you see what it is you're doing. So I think that's one component of it, going back and looking at what's my motivation, what's my purpose here, am I meeting my motivation, why am I not enjoying this? I think a second piece is like proactively managing your stress and well-being. So like a lot of times we don't manage our stress until it becomes problematic, and then we have to do something, make some behavioral changes, lifestyle changes. But on a daily basis, finding a way to either do mindfulness, meditation, just proactively managing your stress is going to be another key component to that. And then I think the next piece of that too, and I go back to when you're burnt out, you're seeing things in essence in a negative light. So it's a perspective issue. How do I look at it differently? How do I look at my circumstance and then see it in a different light? So like a good question to ask yourself would simply be, if someone came to me with this issue, what advice would I give them? And so change the perspective. Or if I'm frustrated, because if you're burnt out, you're going to be frustrated with things. What's a different way to look at my circumstance? And so I think that's a consistent way to change your perspective. And by doing that, you're able to, maybe it's a small change, but just see things in a way you didn't see them the day before or maybe the moment before.
So I see some people are looking just to get back out of the gates. But if you were to say, okay, an elite performer, I'm sitting here with best of the best, and yet we're starting all over to recreate their process. You mentioned in there almost the self-care part to prevent the burnout from either getting worse or from coming to begin with. So if you were designing what would be the perfect week for someone, whether that be business or whether it be, in the sports arena, rank wise, where would you put that? Well, let's call it a recharge phase. Where would you put that in the mix of priorities? Would it be super high, up there with the, with the physical, demands that come with that role? And I say this because in a lot of business, especially, some of the businesses where you're dealing with consumers around the clock too, it's easy to work literally 24/7 of your awake time, right? Eyes open, that phone's going, and it's going till the time your eyes close. And before you know it, a couple of years pass and you were on vacation, but you were on your phone the whole time. There really was no disconnect.
Yeah.
So like, where would you rank? Is it super important to get ahead of that if you want to be elite and stay elite? Yeah. Where would you put that importance?
I think you just hit it on the head. I think it is probably, if not priority number one, it's definitely top two, just simply because with technology and the way the world's evolved, there is no disconnect for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people are very successful. They're just on all the time. Like you're with your phone, and your phone now has your email and everything else, and you're always connected to your business. So separating and having that clear separation where you're just doing something to recharge physically and mentally and separate yourself from your work, that is a critical component to it.
Right. Yeah, this is like recharging Ron's electric car the way here. He goes, oh man, I gotta stop and charge up a little bit, right? And he was looking at the clock on that, but it was probably a great example of an element in the world right now that if you don't stop and charge that car, right, give it its brakes, refuel it, you'd be stuck out in the rain somewhere. Yeah, for sure. Any thoughts on then just advice in general? And I think what's awesome about some of the conversation points that we've had is it's applicable across the scale. So if someone is just starting, of course, they can maybe start to design this path. But if they're in a funk, we can work through that. If we really wanted to take that next step and say, okay, somebody wants to be elite, whether it be in their industry, whether it be in their sport, any other maybe advice or tips that you would have for them, having spent so much time with these people who are operating at that level, even in academics, right? I mean, Columbia, You know, there's a different kind of mental stress that goes on there, both in the faculty sense, right, and in the student body, and they're performing at an elite level, you know, from an intellectual perspective. So anywhere in that span, do you say there's some things that might be really helpful?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing I would say is that if you look at, to me, separating like Hall of Fame level performers from lower level performers and like very successful versus a Hall of Fame, I think the Hall of Fame level performer is an elite problem solver. And I think one of the things they're really good at is when they fail, it's never, because I think when we struggle, we don't get the results we want. A lot of times we ask, am I good enough? And it's an identity issue at the core of it. The elite of the elite, it's never an identity issue. It's, why did I fail? What do I need to do differently to be successful? It's fascinating. I think probably the best example of maybe tennis players, but if you ask tennis players, watch their interviews after a loss, they never talk about how good their opponent was. They always talked about how they weren't always on their game. And the advantage of that is I control me. So if my opponent was so good that now I have to question, maybe I'm just not good enough to beat them, they never talk about the opponent. It's always about, here are the mistakes I made. I wasn't sharp. I didn't do this. I didn't execute this. So the elite of the elite, it is problem solving, but it's also identifying, what do I need to do next time to be successful? And if I failed, why did I fail? What am I going to do differently next time to be successful? I think too, the guys that I work with, I mean, you mentioned process and loving a process, like, they don't ever feel like they're working. They are just excited every single day. We were talking about this the other day with the draft and kind of when we draft players, what are we looking for? I think the takeaway from our guys is they just love to get better at their craft. I don't even know that it's a love of baseball. It's a love of being great, and it's a wanting to get better all the time. So, and at the core of that, you have to do something you're passionate about. And it's a broken record, but we've talked a lot about your why for doing things. You have to understand why you're doing it, and you have to have a passion for doing it. And realistically, if you're pursuing a passion, it doesn't feel like work. And that's one of the things that kind of will take you through those tough times. But I think it's developing a really good process too, which means you're consistently doing it each and every day, and not wavering from it, and not wavering from because you're not getting results. Knowing that if I'm doing the right thing, it's going to, in the long run, that's going to make me successful. Like, I'll give you an example. When I talk to kids in high school kids, I always give them the example. In the 2021 playoffs, we're playing the Giants, and it's a strange day. It's the wind's blowing like crazy in LA. And like, people who lived in LA said they haven't seen this in 30 years. So we go into the ninth inning, we're down a run, and they bring in their closer, Camilo Duvall, and he throws a 99.4 mile an hour fastball on the outer half. Perfectly executed pitch. Gavin Lux hit a ball to center field, and he kind of stands there. He thinks he hit a home run. Hit a 106.9 miles an hour, which, the chance of that being a hit is like 870. So, I mean, it should be a home run. The wind just picks it up and blows it back, ball's caught. And I always ask kids, I don't give them that full story, but I say, Gavin flew out, is that a success or a failure? And they're like, he failed, he got out. No, he did the perfect thing. I mean, if you're doing a fantasy draft and Mother Nature's in there, you might want to take her first because she prevented that ball from being a home run.
Yeah.
But it's to that point, it's really understanding what makes success and failure. And a lot of times, especially when we're struggling, we lose sight of that. We're looking at things in the wrong way. We need to change our perspective and understand if I do my process right every single time, the odds are over the long haul, I'm going to be successful.
That's about this, if I can. In that world, in baseball, among all other worlds, if you don't have a love affair with failure, you're done.
Yeah.
Because the crazy thing is, you fail 70% of the time, you're in the Hall of Fame. That's nuts to the average human being.
Yeah.
Okay, so knowing that means that, you know, you're hitting 280, right? I mean, you're having a good season. You're hitting 280. For that individual who's batting 260, but in their mind, they're so upset because they didn't hit that 300 mark.
Mm-hmm.
What is it specifically that you could potentially say to any one of those ball players who you see is struggling? You could see it. They wear it on their face. They wear it on their body. It comes out in their field of play because they're still thinking about the strike out, the ground out, the pop out, and the one before. And the reason I'm asking the question is because I want to hear what you say to them. And how is it that we can say the same thing to people in the business world?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you a real example, but I won't use a name. I was in the dugout. One of the players came to me and he said, he was a hitter. He's like, I'm really struggling right now. And I said, what makes you say that? And he said, I haven't got a hit my last 15 at bats. And I said, so what makes you say you're in a slump? And he's like, I haven't got a hit my last 15 at bats. And I said, well, I've watched in this game, you've hit 3 balls over 100 miles an hour. So even though they've been caught, you've hit 3 balls over 100 miles an hour. That's not a failure. And then I said, over those 15 at bats that you're talking about, how many pitches have you actually had to hit that you can drive, that you can hammer? And he's like, well, I have no idea. I said, well, let's watch the video. Because how do you know you're in a slump when maybe you haven't had a pitch to hit in 15 at bats? Maybe you haven't had a sale to make in 3 weeks. I mean, so it's really, really digging in and understanding what is actually happening. Because when results don't tell us anything. They give us very little information. It's what is the process that I'm going through that leads to the results. Is it the right process right now based on where I'm at? And understanding that, and it's always the bigger picture. And that's the beauty, I think, and that was the biggest, I think it was twofold when I came to the Dodgers. The biggest surprise for me was, number one, like typically I could go intervene with someone and they'd be successful. At the highest level, it's not that simple. I mean, you can be as confident as you want to be. That guy's throwing 98 and the ball's moving all over the place. It's hard to hit. It's hard, very hard.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And so, but to understand that, like, if I'm doing it the right way over time, that's going to give me the best probability of being successful, is how I have to look at it. And so I think when you're talking to someone, number one, what is their perspective? Is their perspective off? A lot of times, and that's what we make the mistake of, like when you gave the example earlier of busting through that the number and getting to the over 100. It was, we were changing so many things. We didn't know what we were changing and how that was impacting performance. And a lot of times we're doing everything right, but we didn't get a result. So we change all the things we were doing right, trying to get a result. We've just fallen into a trap that we didn't even see existed. And that's why it's important to work through that whole process. Let's step back and say, what is our perspective right now? Are we seeing reality? Are we seeing a mirage based on the fact that we're not getting the numbers that we want? And that's where we have to really dig in and say, what would I do is this worth making a change? Is this a change worth making? Or am I just chasing fool's gold and changing the things that are actually going to make me successful over the long haul? I think that's where it's at.
That's pure gold for a lot of people that right now find themselves in a struggle in business, and they're changing everything. I watch it. I consult, with people all the time, and it feels good because it feels like you're doing something. Yeah. All right. And then I said this to somebody yesterday. I said, here's the problem. A lot of this is market dependent. So if a market changes and all of a sudden it appears to be fixed, you might think it's because of some of the changes you made. Whereas if you had kept to some of those basics from before, who knows, it might have even been more effective. So that talks about taking a step back and really looking at all the dynamics in play. Advice, if you had to give somebody advice in 1 minute or less who is not good at doing the same repetitive things all of the time, right? Certain natural dispositions, like variety a lot more. And we've talked a lot, from an elite perspective, it is about these, repetitive things that we know what those results come out like. What advice would you give them to maybe help them feel a little more comfortable with staying that path and doing these certain things, knowing that the results will eventually come?
Yeah. I think my first question with them would be, do you want to work to get better or work to feel better? Because what you're talking about is someone that wants to work to feel better. They want to feel better about themselves when they're doing things that aren't making them better. And that is something, it's a tough conversation, but in reality, you should only, not always, but you got to do the things that are actually going to make you better. And so if you want variety, try to find out what are the non-negotiables. Where can you have your variety, but then what are the things that you have to be consistent and diligent with on a daily basis, and kind of separating those things out to, but I think it goes, if we put it back into that bigger picture of the burnout piece too, finding your variety, finding your release, finding those other pieces, and taking some time to do things that are going to make you feel good, but then also understanding what is it that I need to do that's going to make me good. Like the example in my world is the guy that takes 1,000 swings a day so that he feels good about his swing. He hasn't done anything to increase the likelihood he's going to get a hit, because it's not replicating what's going to happen in the game. And in reality, he's probably worn himself out to the point that he's not going to be sharp in the game. And so it's a hard conversation. It's tough to do, but you've got to dig in and understand what's the difference between working to make myself feel better about things and what are those non-negotiables that I have to do that are actually going to make a difference and make me better. And like Freddie Freeman's a classic example. He hits less than everyone else, but his process is just rock solid.
And he kills the Mets.
I could go so many ways with that right now.
I bet.
Please do.
I bet. So another quick one that I get out of this. A lot of this too boils down to identity. And if you said, hey, you got to improve your physical, character, there's a plan for that, right? You can go to the gym, you could do that. If you need to, maybe study an opponent and learn a little bit more about, how they're throwing the ball or something like that, there's a plan, there's a way to do that. If someone is facing what they feel is an identity crisis, right? I guess you could say that, but if they say, look, my identity of what I was or where I was is impacting my ability to look forward or to change. You have any suggestions for that, like how to work on the identity part?
Yeah,
and evolve that?
I think it's first and foremost, talk to someone about that. I mean, talk to a professional about that, because our identity can keep us in a box from and keep us from achieving our potential. Definitely. I think the quick answer to that too, though, is a lot of times when people are uncomfortable stepping outside of there and going to that next level, right? As I said, past performance is the strongest predictor. So you're asking someone to go to uncharted territory, someplace they haven't been before. When we look at that, it's really trying to identify, have you committed yourself fully to being at that next level? Because until you do, you don't know if you're capable of being there or not. So, like as an example, in sports and working with kids, I talk to a lot of kids about this. I ask kids, I guess we'll take a baseball example. Like your son plays baseball. How many times have you gone into a game and throughout the entire game stayed present on each pitch, committed to each and every pitch, aggressive, hunting the pitches you want to hit for an entire game, and let's say you're 0 for 3 and you're still doing that? And most kids answer, well, I haven't done it a whole lot. Well, if you haven't done that, you don't know how good you can be until you really stick to it, stick to a solid process, stay committed to achieving success. You don't know what you're capable of. But a lot of times we let results get in the way, and then we back off and we don't do the things that we need to do to be successful. And so I think that identity piece is, in many ways, you got to give yourself a chance. You got to stay with it and then take a longer picture view and then examine, where am I at? Because until I go through that long process, I don't really know.
And that word commit's important, because I think a lot of times, I know I've been guilty of this. I think there's certain transitions in my life where you become a new person, right? The more comfortable thing is to keep one foot there, right? And there's an element of just in case. In case this doesn't work, I need to be able to go there. And the other part is just familiarity. You know it works.
Right.
But if you also want to experience what is the maximum outcome, you kind of got to jump all in, because at one point in time you were all in to get there. So.
Right.
That's awesome. Any final words that you have, whether it be for somebody in business? I know you got a really interesting season coming up, some big signings here, and you are going to share some responsibility in making sure that those billions of dollars were spent correctly. Is there anything that you're, working on specifically right now that could be translatable to our world, or anything to close us out as you get ready to head out to spring training here soon that would be that would be applicable?
I think maybe to sum up everything we've talked about, and an underlying piece of this is we've talked a lot about numbers, goals, those types of things. At the core of how you define success and failure is important, because I think if you look at how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your results, it's all based on how you define success and failure. And an important thing for all of us is defining success and failure in a way that, number one, it's more within our control. So looking at it from the standpoint of like, what did I put into it? Going back to this commitment piece. And when you do that, confidence is a sense of control. The notion that I feel like I can be successful, the more you put your focus onto things you can control, the more likelihood you are going to feel successful and ultimately be successful.
Love that. And I think that's where maybe a little of the detachment from goal setting, which is such a big part of the business world, especially when we're in that challenge space, might be the solution alone for some people, because they're not feeling the pressure of that and focusing on that short term. So, listen, I know you got a lot on your plate. For you to take some time and talk to us, we can pass this knowledge along to our people. It's just a phenomenal gift that you've given to us. So I want to thank you for coming out. And Ron, as always, awesome input and questions. And I just want to say, moving forward, we're so early in the year that so many people annualize success. There's so much time to re-gear, re-gauge, and integrate some of this gold that you've shared with us. And I'm gonna challenge anybody who listens to this here to take one or two things, one little step at a time, and see what they can do to work on some of those mental skills to put themselves in a position to whatever their season is, to have a better one. So thank you for that. And look forward to staying in touch with you and watching a little West Coast baseball and seeing you in the dugout this year.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You got it. Best of luck this year.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.